Hello there, and welcome to this video on the Daystate Huntsman Revere. In our previous video we took a fully complete, fully functioning rifle and broke it down into individual components. In this video we'll be taking those individual components and rebuilding them into a complete rifle. Before we get started though, on your screen now you'll see a complete list of all the tools that we're going to use to carry out this procedure. It includes all the Allen key sizes, as well as spanner sizes, and finally any Daystate specific tooling required for the job. The other thing I wanted to mention is that the O-rings in this rifle have been replaced off camera. If you require any O-rings for your Daystate Revere or any Daystate rifle for that matter, please contact them direct and they'll be happy to supply you with a full O-ring kit. And finally, as I said in the previous video, this particular rifle is a sub 12 foot-pound 177 rifle, although the information given in these videos will be relevant for different calibers and also FAC rifles. With that all said, we can get started, and the first thing we're going to tackle is the valve. First thing we're going to do is take this small O-ring here, add a small amount of silicone grease to it, wiping off the excess with our fingers, then get that installed in the block with the use of some tweezers. Just get that nudged into position. And you can see that there. It's in its little seat in the base of the block, so in this counterbore here. With that done, we can take our small brass nut and then get that installed over the top of it. We're going to be doing that up nice and tightly using a nice long, wide, flat-bladed screwdriver. With that done, we can start on the valve. The first thing we're going to do is add our valve return spring to this little boss on the cover here. Next, we'll take our valve seat and add a small amount of silicone grease to this O-ring around the outside of the valve seat. Now, the valve does have an orientation within the rifle. This counterboard section faces up or towards the valve pin, and this flat section faces down or towards the hammer spring side of the rifle. So if we take our block like so, it goes in this way. As you put that in there, just make sure that it falls up the right way. And then with that in place, we can take our valve pin and then using a set of tweezers, we can get that installed into the block. Just drop it in for now. And when we put this cap on with our spring, everything will line up. So if we look through this hole here, we can see the back of the valve, and we can also guide the spring or the valve return spring onto the back of the valve pin. As you can hopefully see there, the camera might pick it up. In this hole here, the valve spring is correctly seated on the back of the valve pin, so we can get this cap screwed up. Getting it done all the way in by hand, then coming through with a set of snap ring pliers and just tightening it up. There we have it there. The last thing we'll do is just make sure that the valve's seated correctly by taking a nice big Allen key and pressing the valve to make sure that the spring is situated on the back of it correctly. With that done, we'll stick this assembly to one side and bring back the hammer. And here we have the hammer components. To reassemble the hammer, what we'll do first is I'll take our hammer weight, put that in the hammer housing, get the hole in the side of the hammer weight lined up with the hammer housing, and then using an M4 bolt we'll just get that screwed into the side of the hammer weight. Next we'll take our brass screw here and this small spring, get the spring installed over the brass section, and then add a small amount of blue Loctite to these threads here. Small amount will do us. With that done, we can get the brass section screwed into the hammer weight. Getting that done up nice and tightly using a flat-bladed screwdriver. With that done, we can take our housing and lightly unscrew the M4 bolt until it's not protruding into this threaded section here. So it wants to be threaded in about a turn or so, just so it's in there. Then we'll take our striking face of our hammer and get that screwed in. Now the striking face of the hammer wants to be orientated in this way, so we have the flat section on this side and the Allen head section on this side of the hammer. With that screwed in, we'll take a 3mm Allen key and very gently screw it into the housing. To screw it into the housing, we need to be turning the Allen key counterclockwise. And we're going to be doing this until the grub screw stops. So on our rifle, that's about there. We'll take the M4 bolt out the side and replace that with our small grub screw. So this unit here, we'll get that done up using a 2mm Allen key. There we have the hammer reassembled. With that done though, we can get the hammer reinstalled into the block of the rifle, orientating the flat section of the hammer with the top of the rifle. Next, we can take this short M3 bolt and get that installed into the hammer. We can do that with the use of a 2.5mm Allen key. Getting that done up nice and tight, although being careful as what we're screwing into is only Delrin, and if you do it up too tight you may strip the threads. Next up, we'll reassemble the safety. And here we have all the components for the safety laid out. The first thing we're going to do is take this piece here and add a small amount of moly grease to the small ball detents, these pieces here. It's just a small amount will do us, and also to this hole here. Next, we're just going to spread a small amount of grease around the housing there, wiping off the excess with our fingers. Just a small amount will do us. Next, we'll take this piece here, drop that over the top of this piece, making sure to get this pin here lined up with this hole here. Next, we'll take this screw here, add a small amount of blue Loctite to the threaded portion of this. Just a small amount will do us. Then we can get that screwed into the back. Getting that done up nice and tightly with a wide flat-bladed screwdriver. Next, we can take this ball bearing here, add a small amount of moly grease to it, and then get that dropped into this hole in the back of the safety. With that done, we can add our spring over the top of it, then finally cap that off with our small grub screw. Getting that done up with a 1.5mm Allen key, although this doesn't need to be tight, it simply needs to secure the spring and provide a good detent feeling as we rotate the safety. Next, we'll take our anti-tamper bar, which is this piece here, and get that installed into this hole here. Cap that off using our screw. Getting the screw done up with a 3/32 Allen key. Then finally, getting the retaining nut done up with a 1/4" spanner. Next thing we'll do is get the safety reinstalled into the main block. To get the safety reinstalled into the back of the rifle, what we need to do first is add our hammer spring, so this unit here, to the back there. Then take our safety, orientate these two holes with the top of the block, so they should match these two holes in the top of the block. Get that lined up like so. Push the safety into the back, and then using the two small dog-pointed grub screws, get those installed, one in either side. The dog-pointed grub screw means that the grub screw has a small step on the back of it, so hopefully you can see that there. There we have the safety reinstalled into the back of the block. Next thing we'll do is bring back the reg and start work on that. With that said, we can start work on the regulator. The first thing we're going to do is add a small amount of silicone grease to all the internal O-rings. So just a small amount will do us, wiping off the excess with our fingers. With that done, I'll give you a quick look at the regulator piston, and you can see how the Belleville washers are stacked. So the Belleville washers are stacked in pairs, and there are 6, so 3 pairs. The first 2 can be cupped away from the piston, so like so. The next 2 are in the opposite direction, and then finally the last 2 are cupped towards the top of the regulator body. So there we have it there. With that done, we'll take our white sealing disc, this piece here, and add that to the top of the regulator piston. With that done, we'll take our reg body and get the piston pushed up through the middle, making sure that the white sealing disc faces the top there. With that done, the next thing we can do is get the snap ring installed into the bottom. We're going to do that using a set of snap ring pliers. With that done, the final thing we can do is add the adjuster screw to the top of the regulator. Getting that done up with a flat bladed screwdriver. In the disassembly video, we took a measurement from the top of the reg body to the top of the reg piston, and that measured about 3.2, so we're going to set the reg adjuster screw to that measurement. And there we have it. The black mark at the top there lines up nicely, and we've also got the measurement that we measured before we took it apart, so about 3.2. Next up, we'll reassemble our air cylinder. We're going to be concentrating on the fill end first. To begin with, we'll start with taking our one-way valve, which is this piece here, and adding a small amount of silicone grease to the urethane O-ring, which is this piece here. Next, we'll take that and get that dropped into this hole here, getting that pushed down into position, then using an Allen key just to seat it. Next, we'll take this small spacer piece here, drop that over the top of the one-way valve, and finally cap that off with this small brass nut here. We can get that done up using a nice wide flat-bladed screwdriver. On my rifle, before we took it apart, this filter was level with the counter bore here, so that's where we're going to leave it in the reassembly process. The next thing we'll do is add our gauge back to the front. The gauge has already got the Doughty washer installed, so we can screw that on the end there, and then get that done up using a 22mm spanner. Next thing we'll do is add a small amount of silicone grease to these two O-rings here. Then get that installed into the front of the air cylinder. In the air cylinder we have the writing at one end. This is the regulated side. And then coming through with our 7mm punch, putting it through the fill hole there, getting that done up nice and tightly. With that done, the last thing we'll install is our regulator. First of all, just getting an M5 bolt screwed lightly into the piston in the bottom. Then we can add a small amount of silicone grease to the two O-rings. So one around the outside here, then the other, which is this O-ring on the base here. Just a small amount will do us. Then we can get that installed into the air cylinder. We'll get it pushed in level with the threads for now, and then when we get the air tube screwed onto our valve here, it'll push it in the correct distance. Next thing we'll do is get the trigger reinstalled onto the rifle. The first thing we'll do is take our trigger housing. Next we can take the 3 slot-headed bolts and get them installed into the trigger housing. Once that's done, we can take our housing, drop that over the block like so, making sure all the screw holes line up nicely, then getting those screws done up with a flat-bladed screwdriver. With that done, we can start getting the sears installed. First, we'll take our first sear, which is this one here, and we need to get this hole in the side lined up with this hole in the side of the trigger housing. With the sear roughly in place, what I like to do is put the pin in from the bottom. That way you can hold the pin in position and then move the sear until the hole lines up. Doing it like so allows you to just push the pin through the back and get the sear captured. We'll do the same for the second sear, which is this one here. This screw here needs to line up with the hole that's present in the first sear. And we're lining this hole up in the sear with this hole in the side of the trigger housing. And then finally we can get the trigger installed in the final hole. And there we have it. The trigger does have 2 holes in it, but we're only interested in the hole in the top of the trigger blade. The next thing we'll do is take our spacer piece, which is this piece here, and get that installed with the use of some pin nose pliers. There we have it. The spacer piece needs to be lined up with this hole in the side of the trigger housing. Then when it's all lined up, we can take our screw, get that pushed through, and then get that done up using a 2.5mm Allen key. Next up, we can install the trigger guard. So to do that, we're just going to drop our trigger guard on the top, take our black nut, put that in the front of the trigger guard, then take our retaining screw and get that done up with a flat bladed screwdriver. And then once both are started, we can position the trigger guard into the correct place and then get both screws done up nice and tight. Next thing we'll do is get our stock bolt attachment installed. So we're going to be taking these 2 pieces here and get them installed. First off, we'll screw the grub screw in using a 3mm Allen key. Get that done up nice and tight. Next, we'll take our nut and get that screwed over the top. Getting that done up nice and tight using an 11mm spanner. Whilst we're here, we will also add our regulator gauge. So we have the gauge with the spacer piece and then the 2 doughty washers fitted in situ. So one at this end, one at this end. We can get that screwed into the front there. Getting that done up nice and tight with a 22mm spanner. With that done, we'll put the bottom half of the action over to one side and get started on the top section. The first thing we'll do is add the pellet probe and the cock and arm assembly. To begin with, we'll take our pellet probe and add a small amount of moly grease to the outside of the probe. Just a light smear will do us. With that done, we can take the probe and get that pushed in the back. The pellet probe does have an orientation. If we take a look at the bottom here, this counterbore section of the pellet probe needs to be facing down. With that done, the next thing we'll add is the cocking dog. Before that goes in, we will be adding a small amount of blue Loctite to the cocking dog to make sure it doesn't come undone under normal use. Just a small amount will do us. Then we'll get that screwed into this hole on the pellet probe. And we're getting that done up with a 3/32 Allen key. Next up, we'll add this small cover piece to the back of the block. To do that, we orientate it so the thick end of the slope is orientated towards the bottom of the block. Get that pushed into position. And then by adding this unique screw to the bottom. It's unique as it has a smaller head than the rest of the screws present on the block. And we're going to get that done up with a 2mm Allen key. Next thing we'll do is get the cocking arm installed onto the rifle. The first thing we need to do though is decide which side we want the cocking arm to be placed on. It can be placed on either the right or the left. I'm going to be installing mine on the right as that's where I prefer my cocking arms. And before that goes in, we're just going to be adding a small amount of moly grease to this area here. And then we can take our bush, get that pushed through the hole like so. Then wipe off the excess grease with our fingers. Next, we can take the cocking arm and get that installed into the block, lining up the hole in the pellet probe, or the cocking arm I should say, with the hole in the block. Then we can take our long screw, this one here, and get that installed over the top of that, doing that up nice and tightly with a 2.5mm Allen key. Next thing we'll do is take this section of the cocking arm and get that lined up with the pellet probe. Then from the other side, we'll go ahead and add this screw into the middle of these 3 holes here. Getting that again done up nice and tight with a 2.5mm Allen key. With that done, we can add the cover plate over to this side. So we'll get that hooked into the block like so, and then secure it by using this small screw here in this hole here. Getting that done up nice and tight with a 2.5mm Allen key. The final thing we can do is add the cocking handle, and we're going to get that installed using a 2.5mm Allen key. Next up, we'll install the barrel. So we'll bring the barrel back over, then we'll get the barrel installed into the front of the block. Next, we'll install the barrel retention screws, which are these two here. So we have two sizes. The longer ones, these ones here, go in the top of the block, and then the slightly shorter ones go in the bottom of the block. And before the grub screws go in, we'll just make sure that everything's lined up, so the transfer port and the dimples in the barrel. Then we can cover those with the grub screws, getting those done up nice and tightly with a 2mm Allen key. Next thing we'll do is reinstall the shroud. First thing we'll do is take our end carrier for the barrel, put a small amount of silicone grease over this O-ring here, then get that pushed into the end of the shroud like so. Next up, we'll take this spacer O-ring here, get that dropped over the top there, and then we can add our 1/2" UNF end cap to the end. Getting that done up nice and tightly with a nice wide flat bladed screwdriver. Finally, I'm just going to add the thread protector over the end so it doesn't get lost. Next thing we'll do is flip the block over, then install the shroud onto the barrel. As you push the shroud on, it might take a little bit of wiggling to get the end carrier for the shroud lined up with the barrel. But once it's pushed all the way home, we can take our two securing grub screws, which are these two here, and get those installed using a 1/16 Allen key. As you do those up, just make sure this hollow, this section of the shroud here, is not lined up nicely with the bottom of the block. If it's not lined up correctly, you may come into a little bit of trouble when you mate the two halves of the block together. Next thing we can do is mate the two halves of the block together. So the first thing we'll do is get these O-rings installed. Before they go in though, we're just going to add a small amount of silicone grease to them. The first one goes into this hole here, and we'll just get that pushed into place, like so. Do the same for the other one, small amount of silicone grease around it. Then we can get that dropped into this hole here, into the bottom of the barrel. With that done, we'll take our small brass transfer port, this piece here, get that pushed in like so. Next up, we'll take the bottom half of the block and get that dropped over the top half. Just getting the two halves of the block lined up and the transfer ports lined up as you do so. Once that's done, we can take these two screws here, so two long Allen headed bolts, and drop those into these holes here. We can take our triangle headed anti-tamper bolts, we'll drop those into the back holes there. Then we can take the two slot headed bolts and get them dropped into the middle. Next we can do those bolts up. What I like to do is get them all started first before doing any one up tight. So the two front ones can be done up using a 2.5mm Allen key. The two back ones need our special Daystate anti-tamper tool. And then the two middle ones can be just done up using a flat bladed screwdriver. Once they're all started, we can go round and do them all up nice and tightly. Next we can add our barrel band and the end cover for our gauge section here. So we'll add the barrel band over the shroud, slide it down till we get to this section here, then gently help it over the O-rings. Next we can take our end cover and with the slot cut out to the back, we'll get that pushed over like so. Then we can get the barrel band secured using the M3 grub screws, which are these grub screws here. We're going to get those done up nice and tightly using a 1.5mm Allen key. And there we have it. That's the rifle pretty much fully rebuilt. What I'll do now is get the rifle gassed up, and I'll also leak test the rifle to make sure that there's no leaks. I'll go ahead and do that now, and I'll bring you back in a couple hours. Right then, the rifle has been sitting for a few hours now, and it's showing absolutely no signs of any leaks. If we take a look at the reg gauge on the bottom, we can also see it's just about at the 100 bar mark, which it was before we took it apart. The last thing we'll do in this video is put the stock back on. So we'll bring back the stock over, we'll sit the action on its end like so, drop the stock over the action, and then get the stock bolt installed into this hole here. Getting that done up nice and tightly with a 5mm Allen key. And there we have it. That's the reassembly of the rifle fully complete. With that all said and done, that's pretty much going to do it for this video. We will be covering adjusting the power of the rifle and adjusting the trigger of the rifle in a separate video, but for now, that's pretty much going to do it for this video. So thank you for watching, I hope it's been useful, and we'll see you in the next one.